What's up, everybody? It's Eric Weathers here, and I put a call out on Twitter earlier this evening saying, hey, you know what? I wanted to make a lettering video. What kind of topics you got for me? And there were a couple that stood out that were repeated that I thought, you know what? Those are great questions. Let me answer those questions for you, and maybe we can demystify the lettering, you know, mystery. Can you demystify a mystery? I don't even know. But one of the ones that was repeated a lot is how do you pick your font? Like, how do you know what image to pick or what font to pick based on what your artwork is or what size to pick, things like that. And that seems like a pretty easy one to answer. And I'll show you a couple of ways that I do that. Mainly, first of all, the font choice, I would say, in terms of style, is dictated by the artwork itself. So I grabbed a couple of images off of Google, a couple pages from one from Todd McFarlane and one from Joe Mad, and just to show you examples of different art styles that might require different lettering. So let's jump in here and take a look. First, we have this page from some Spider-Man. I don't know my Spider-Man. I couldn't tell you what issue this was, but it's a Todd McFarlane Spider-Man, and this actually was hand lettered by Tom Orzechowski back in 1990 something. This is a method I used to use back when I was learning how to letter years ago. I always wondered, how do I know what size of font to pick? Because there are places you can get comic book fonts, but do you want a size 0.7, a 0.12? Like, what is it going to be? And the short answer is, you don't know, because every font is different. I mean, I've got, 5 fonts here on the side that you can see, and they all have different, slightly different sizes, slightly different spacings in between. But if you look, they're all 8-point fonts with 8-point leading, which is the spacing in between the lines, right? So it's all 8, but they're different sizes. It's not one for one. An 8-point font with, back issues here, which is a free font from blambot.com, isn't the same as the Anime Ace. Anime Ace looks much bigger, even though it's, as you can see on the right-hand side of here, 8 points in size. So how do we know what to do? One of the first tricks I did, and you can feel free to use this, this is just sort of, again, how I learned how to do it, is I would grab a digital page, a comic book page off of Google, and size it to, I knew I had to print a comic, and I knew it had to be roughly this size, and back then I was using a different printer. I didn't know the standards, but I would grab a comic book off of Google, and I would grab a font and sort of place it over the top of it and just try to match the size. So let's do that here real quick. So we'll type it out. Let me just copy one of these fonts. Let's copy this one right here. I believe this is the Joe Kubert font, which you can find on comicbookfonts.com. So let's copy the text. You've got 3 seconds. Can I type? To let ... All right. And we'll resize that. Actually, I'm using my template, and it's on the wrong layer, so I got to fix that. Let me move that here. If you're interested in these templates, you can get them on my Gumroad. Just go to howtolettercomics.com? .net? .com? It's been a while. howtolettercomics.com. It'll take you to my Gumroad, and you can buy the template that I'm using, a version of the template that I'm using. And I'll jump into that real quick. But the copy method, this is like tracing sizes, is you'll want to take it over and see if it lines up and see if it matches. And if we zoom in, we can see it's close. It's very close. And this is a handwritten font, right? This is Tom Orzechowski. He would have had guides and rulers to sort of make everything even and legible, but there's that human element to it. So I would kind of say maybe we could drop it down to maybe a 7, and let's see how that looks. We want to reshape that balloon or that text. And you see just there, it fits a little bit better, but the leading might be a little bit too wide. That's, again, leading is the space in between the lines. That's, I don't know if my mouse is showing up, but that's the space in between all the lines here. So let's drop that down, and that's over here, which is set the leading button. And you can do that, and you see that is almost perfect. right? So this is how I used to do it. Now I have a gold standard, right, to letter, to know what size of lettering I need. So from here on out, any text that you drop in on the comic book page, I'm going to go ahead and hide this page. You can either copy it over, which if you hold the Alt key or the Option key, Command key on the Mac. I use a Mac, but I have a plug-in Windows keyboard, so my shortcut knowledge is completely trash. And then you can add the new text. Normally you would copy and paste from the script, but of course I'm typing it in right now. Citizen. I hope that's spelled right. Citizen. It's probably not. That's why we have editors, right? So now you know that's always going to be the right size. It's always going to be uniform throughout the page. And that's how I basically figured out a good way to size my fonts. And like I said, not every font's the same. So this is a Joe Kubert font from comicbookfonts.com. It is now a 7 point size with a 7 leading. But if you were to grab any of these other fonts or any more, right, this Back Issues font, I lettered a lot with this in my early days. And it's, let's just take a look here. Comparable letters, right? These two T's. They're pretty darn close. But the leading is a little bit wider, and that you might prefer that. I like a little bit tighter squeeze between the lines, personally. So it's an 8 point with probably a 7. I might change that to a 7.5, just so there's a little bit of breathing room. And you want to make your fonts compact enough that you're not covering up too much artwork, but not so compact that everything just runs together when you're, reading it on the screen or on the page. Another way to sort of test this size-wise is to print something like this out on your printer at home and maybe just hold it up to your comic books and make sure that the fonts, line up. It was always sort of these ways I sort of cheated into making sure my fonts were the right size. But once you sort of have that down, if you're making one comic book, then you're set, right? Because you've got your print standards and you're good to go. But what if you're like me and you letter a lot of books and you don't know, like, everything is different? Well, that's why this where this template comes into play. So I can drop in any artwork, and again, I grabbed 2 random pages that are actually already lettered from Google. I've got one here from we've seen this one from Todd McFarlane from 1990 something. This, if you'll notice, is inside, right along the trim line, because that's where it would have been cut in print, and that's why we have this the size that it is, if that makes sense. So let me show you what I mean. If I were to scale this up slightly, it's not going to fit properly. I'll show you. The black lines here, that's sort of the edge of the artwork bounds. A normal comic book page, when it's printed and trimmed, it trims American Standard, and there are some deviations depending on the printer, depending on the publisher, but generally speaking, 6.625 by 10.1875. And that is after it's trimmed, after it's gone through the printer and it's set. But when you're lettering digitally, you want to account for that bleed. So that's what I have here on this template, is everything outside of that red dotted line is bleed, and bleed is anything that you want to run all the way to the edge. Any comic book artwork or whatever that's going to be trimmed off at the edge, and that measurement is 0.125 inches all the way around. That bleed margin is 0.125 inches all the way around. So this size of this template is 6.875 by 10.4375. I know those numbers are confusing. Rewind if you need to hear them again. Or just download the template from my Gumroad. But basically, you can see that this page doesn't fit, right? Because it's a little bit taller than here, and that's because when this was scanned in, it's from a page that had already been trimmed, right? There was never a digital version of this. So when you scale it down, it lines up perfectly in those trim lines, okay? And this second page I have over here is this Joe Mad page, and this is one where the page is accounting for that. So, and different artists work in different dimensions, and I know like Joe Mad draws on like, copy paper. So his measurements are a little off here or there, and his colorist would have fit the page to sort of fit within the dimensions. But as you can see, everything fits in here, and you could size it down. Like if I would have gotten this page from somebody and it wasn't fitting right, this play in here of it sort of being outside the safe zone, that's what the blue line is the safe zone. That is, it's workable. You could zoom like that, but it really only works if the gutters of that page are white, because otherwise the printer will print this white space and it may or may not cut exactly on that red line right here. So if it's anything outside that red line is going to be bleed, and that's where it needs to be. But this generally lines up pretty well. Okay, so with my template, you can actually, I have these guides over here on the right-hand side, and it's a hidden layer right now, but if I turn it on, you see these blue lines here. And that will show when I'm lettering, like what is a good size. So if I pick a random font, like this is the Anime Ace font, and I drag it here, and I zoom way in, I can see I have some room to play, right? It might be a little bit too big. A little bit too big is not too bad, because you want your font to be legible. You want your lettering to be legible, and the smaller it is, the harder it is to read. But if you go in here and play, and you want the text to go within the two wide lines, and the two narrow lines are where you want that leading space. And there again, there's some give and play. It's more of guidelines than actual rules with this idea here. So I could probably bump this particular font down 1 point, maybe another one, or half of one. So I'll type this in at 6.5. And then, again, I don't like a whole lot of leading in between personally, so I would probably maybe bump that to 7. And then I'm looking at here the second line, the need to fear line, and see how that space is almost uniform. It is pretty much uniform from top to bottom, and that's great. This is actually a great font to use. In terms of style, like what font would you want to choose depending on what your book is? You want to try and find a font that fits the artwork, right? You want to, if it's an indie comic and there's not a lot of detail, there's not a lot of action, you would want a font that's a little bit more straight-laced, a little straightforward, not a lot of, energy in the lines. This Anime Ace is sort of bouncy. It fits in that anime vibe, which is why it's called Anime Ace. This font right here is, right, where did it go? I had a Joe Mad font here. At least I thought I did. Well, let's just change it, all right? And then this will be a good test. So I'll go in here and type in Joe Mad, and this is actually his font from that website. And see, look, it fits. This is actually a great size for it, for the template, so it'll print right. And yeah, that looks pretty. You want to get it just right, and then size your balloon to fit it, and then you just hide that layer, and it's gone. So if you've got a more energetic style of artwork, find a font that's got some more bounce to it, some more energy in it. And if you've got sort of maybe a more subdued art style, fonts that are a little bit more straightforward, like this one up here, this Joe Mad one, Joe Kubert one, excuse me. And there are hundreds of fonts out there. I highly recommend checking out blambot.com. Tons of free fonts there, tons of paid fonts that aren't too expensive, $20, $40 fonts. You buy them once, you can use them however long you need them. It's not like you have to buy it every time you make a book. It's not how it works. And then comicbookfonts.com is the comic craft. That's like the industry standard for fonts. And I use them sort of interchangeably, depending on the project. I work exclusively on indie books, but having different fonts based on art styles and things like that. And I have my favorites that I like to use, sort of go-tos when there's sort of artists that have like what would you call a classic comic book style. I guess that can kind of mean anything to anybody, but to me, like the 90s or even 2000s, superhero comics. There are certain, like Jim Lee art and things like that. There are certain fonts that sort of are almost catch-alls, but not always. I don't think one font is one size fits all for any style of artwork, but it is certainly a good jumping off point, is trying to match the energy of the artwork with the energy of the font, and that way it sort of has a synergy and fits the style of the book. Because if you have a really bombastic font, comic book font, and your art style is really looks like, I don't know, like mouse or something like that, then it's not really going to work. So, just something to keep in mind. Yeah, I guess that's it as far as font choice goes. Again, if you want to know like how to fit, if you want your artwork to fit perfectly for print and it's always going to match and it's always going to be the right font, check out my templates here on Gumroad, howtolettercomics.com, and you can get this template and you'll be able to fit your font into the right size. Anyways, that's the video. Thanks for checking it out.